Daniel was a young man who lived on the edge of a small town. His house stood close to the forest, where tall trees whispered with the wind and the nights were filled with silence. Daniel liked peace. He worked during the day at a nearby workshop, fixing farm machines and old cars. At night he sat on his porch, watching the stars. The sky always made him wonder if someone out there was watching back. One autumn evening, while he was walking home, he noticed something strange. The sky was darker than usual, but a glowing light cut through the clouds. It was not the steady light of a plane or the quick burn of a shooting star. This light flickered and danced, moving low, almost brushing the treetops. Daniel stopped in the middle of the road, his heart beating faster. He thought for a moment it might be some kind of accident. Without thinking much, he stepped into the forest. Following the glow, the woods were quiet except for his footsteps and the rustle of leaves. The deeper he went, the brighter the strange light became. Finally, in a small clearing, Daniel saw something that left him frozen. Two young girls stood near a broken piece of metal which looked burned and strange, like it had fallen from the sky. Their clothes were torn, their faces smudged with dirt, and their large eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Daniel's first thought was that they might be children from some traveling group who had crashed something. But when one of the girls looked up, he knew they were not from Earth. Her skin shimmered with tiny star-like patterns, glowing and fading softly. The other girl tried to speak, but the words were broken, mixed with sounds he had never heard before. They were not human. Fear rose in his chest, but he also saw their fear. They were trembling, holding each other's hands tightly, like lost children in a strange place. Daniel could not turn away. He slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said softly. Even though he knew they would not understand all his words, "You're safe. Don't be afraid." The taller girl tilted her head, her glowing eyes fixed on him. The younger one hid behind her, peeking out with curiosity. Their stomachs made faint growling sounds, and Daniel realized they were hungry. Without another thought, he reached into his bag and pulled out an apple he had taken from home earlier. He held it out. The sisters looked at each other. The younger one stepped forward first, her small hands reaching carefully. She took the apple and sniffed it, then took a cautious bite. Her face lit up, and she made a soft, happy sound. The taller one followed, still cautious, but clearly starving. They ate quickly, as if they had not tasted food in days. Daniel watched, his heart softening. They were just children, far from home, scared and lost. He didn't know where they came from, or how they had ended up here. But he knew one thing: he could not leave them alone in the forest. "Come," he said, pointing toward his home. He touched his chest and spoke his name clearly. "Daniel." Then he pointed at them, waiting. The taller girl hesitated, but then spoke a word almost like music. "Arya." She pointed at herself. Then she gestured to her sister. "Leora." Daniel smiled. "Arya, Leora." "All right, let's go." They followed him, still holding hands. The walk back was quiet except for the sound of their bare feet on the leaves. When they reached his small farmhouse, Daniel quickly led them to the barn. He didn't want his neighbors to see them. Inside, he laid down old blankets, gave them more food, and brought warm milk. They ate and drank with gratitude, their strange glowing eyes softening as trust began to form. For days, Daniel kept their secret. Every evening after work, he brought them food bread, apples, sometimes soup. He taught them simple words. They learned quickly, repeating after him, their voices sweet and careful. Soon Arya could say small sentences in English, while Leora mostly listened, smiling shyly. They laughed at his attempts to copy their strange musical language, and sometimes they would hum soft songs before sleeping. Daniel began to see them not as aliens, but as two sisters who had somehow fallen into his life. They reminded him of children who had lost their way, except their eyes still carried the sadness of being far from home. At night, he would sit outside the barn, watching the sky, wondering if someone out there was searching for them. Weeks passed, and the bond between them grew stronger. Daniel fixed small things for them. He built a proper bed out of hay and wood, found them clean clothes from old storage, and even made a lantern to keep the barn warm at night. Arya once touched his hand and whispered, "Safe," her voice soft and full of meaning. Leora hugged him without a word, but everything changed one night. Daniel was asleep when the sky lit up again. A strange hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls of his house. He rushed outside and saw bright lights above the forest, stronger and more focused than before. The barn doors opened, and Arya and Leora came running out. Their eyes wide with both hope and fear, the lights descended lower, covering the clearing in front of his house. A beam of shining blue wrapped around the sisters. Daniel tried to grab them, but Arya only smiled sadly, touching his face with her glowing hand. "Thank you," she whispered. In a flash, both sisters disappeared into the beam. The sky grew quiet again, the lights vanishing into the stars. Daniel stood alone in the cold night, staring at the empty space where they had been. On the ground, a faint mark glowed for a few seconds before fading. A circle burned into the earth. The barn felt empty without them. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but Daniel never saw them again. Still, he never forgot. Every time he looked at the stars, he remembered two sisters with glowing eyes, who had once been hungry and afraid, and how he had fed them. He didn't know if they would ever come back, but he carried their memory quietly, like a secret promise in his heart. 15 years passed. Daniel was no longer the same young man who once discovered two frightened girls in the forest. His hair had begun to show a little gray, and lines touched his face, but his spirit was still kind and steady. He worked as a mechanic in town, fixing tractors, old cars, and sometimes even newer machines that puzzled others. People respected him because he was honest and never cheated anyone. But inside, Daniel carried a secret he had never shared. He still remembered Arya and Leora, the two sisters who had come from the stars. Every evening, he still looked at the sky. He would stand by his porch and stare at the stars, wondering if the sisters were alive, if they remembered him, or if that night 15 years ago had been only a short dream. Sometimes he thought he heard their soft voices calling his name in the wind. Other times, he almost convinced himself he had imagined everything. Yet deep in his heart, he knew it was real. Life was simple until one evening when the peace of his small town was broken. It began with a rumble in the air. At first, people thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Then a booming sound echoed, shaking the ground. Lights appeared above the clouds, bright, sharp, and moving in ways no airplane ever could. The townsfolk ran outside, pointing, shouting in fear. Daniel felt a chill. Something inside him told him this was no ordinary event. He walked slowly to the open fields, where everyone else was gathering. The lights grew brighter until a massive ship broke through the clouds. Sleek, metallic, and glowing with strange blue lines, it hovered above the fields. The air buzzed with energy, making the grass bend. Some people screamed. Others fell to their knees. Daniel only stared, his heart racing. The ship lowered until it touched the ground, shaking the earth beneath their feet. A ramp slid open, and from the bright interior, figures began to appear. They were tall, armored, in shining suits that reflected the evening light. Their helmets hid their faces, but their movements were sharp, disciplined like trained soldiers. Each carried a glowing weapon across their backs. The sight made the crowd step back in fear, but Daniel stood still. Something about the way the soldiers walked felt strangely familiar. His breath caught when two figures moved forward, removing their helmets. Gasps rose from the crowd. The two women who revealed their faces were not strangers to Daniel. Their glowing eyes, their shimmering skin, he knew them at once. They were no longer the frightened children he had once fed. They were strong now, tall, proud, and radiant, like warriors of legend. "Arya." "Leora," Daniel whispered. The sisters looked directly at him. A smile touched their lips. Their eyes softened, the way they had so long ago. The townsfolk stared, confused and frightened. They whispered to each other, wondering why these alien leaders seemed to know an ordinary mechanic. Then Arya stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, speaking in perfect English. "Daniel." The sound of his name echoed across the fields. People gasped. Arya lifted her chin and turned to the crowd. "This man," she declared, "once saved us, When we were lost, when we were helpless, when no one else stood by us, he gave us food, shelter, and kindness. For 15 years, we have carried his name. We have returned for him." The people looked at Daniel in disbelief. Leora stepped beside her sister, her voice lower but filled with emotion. "In our people's law, to feed the lost is to bind lives together. That bond can never be broken. He is ours, and we are his." Daniel stood frozen. He could barely breathe. Their words washed over him like a tide, pulling him between awe and confusion. Bondmate? He did not know what it meant in their world, but the way they said it, the weight in their voices, told him it was something sacred. The soldiers behind them lowered their heads, bowing slightly toward Daniel. For a man who had lived quietly all his life, the sight of alien warriors showing him respect felt unreal. The mayor of the town stepped forward nervously. "Excuse me, who are you people? What is happening here? Why are you saying these things about Daniel?" Arya's eyes glowed brighter as she spoke. "We are commanders of the Star Legion. Our journey has taken us through battles and across countless worlds. Yet every step, we remembered him. This man gave us life when we were children. Now, by our tradition and by our choice, we claim him as bondmate." The mayor stuttered, looking between Daniel and the sisters. The townsfolk whispered, their voices full of shock. Daniel finally found his voice. "Arya, Leora, I don't understand. I'm just a mechanic. I helped you because it was the right thing. You don't owe me anything." Arya shook her head gently. "You still do not see. To us, you are more than a mechanic. You are the reason we survived. We built our strength on the memory of your kindness. Every battle we fought, every victory we won, was guided by the thought of returning to you." Leora stepped closer, her expression softer. "We were children, Daniel. You were our protector. Now we return as warriors, but our bond is unchanged. It is forever." The crowd grew silent. Some looked at Daniel with awe, others with disbelief. The idea that a simple man from their town was connected to alien leaders seemed impossible. Daniel's hands trembled. He wanted to speak, to explain that he had only done what any decent person should do. But when he met their glowing eyes, he realized nothing he said would change their belief. For them, his small act had shaped their destiny. The sisters turned back to their ship. Arya raised her hand, and the ramp glowed. She looked once more at Daniel. "Come with us. See the stars as we do. You belong to our bond now." Daniel stood still, torn between the life he knew and the strange future unfolding before him. His heart was heavy with questions, but deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that perhaps this was meant to be. The townsfolk remained frozen in shock, watching as the story of Daniel's past came alive before their eyes. The man they thought they knew was no longer just their neighbor or their mechanic. He was part of something greater, something that stretched far beyond Earth. Daniel had never imagined his quiet life would be pulled into the center of something far greater. After that night, his town was never the same. People whispered about him in the streets. Some looked at him with awe, others with doubt, but no one could deny what they had seen. Alien warriors bowing to a human mechanic. Arya and Leora stayed close, visiting often from their ship that rested in the fields outside of town. They wore their armor with pride, yet when they spoke to Daniel, their voices softened, reminding him of the children he had once cared for. He still struggled to understand the word they used, bondmate, but the way they said it carried deep meaning. To them, he was more than a friend. He was part of their destiny. One evening, Daniel asked them quietly, "Why me? I was just a man with an apple and a loaf of bread. I didn't save the universe. I only fed 2 lost girls." Arya smiled gently. "Kindness is the rarest strength. You gave it freely when we had nothing." That moment shaped us. It carried us through years of battles. "To our people, it means everything," Leora added softly. "To us, you are home." Daniel's heart ached at their words. He could not argue, though part of him felt unworthy. Still, he accepted that what was small to him had been great to them. But peace did not last soon. News spread across the stars. Other alien races heard whispers that 2 Star Legion commanders had bonded themselves to a human. The Galactic Council called for a gathering to question it. Some said it was a sign of danger that humanity's kindness could inspire loyalty to strong, breaking old balances of power. Others mocked the idea, laughing at the thought of simple Earth people being important. Arya and Leora brought Daniel aboard their warship and traveled with him to the council. For Daniel, it was like stepping into a dream. The ship soared above Earth, leaving behind blue skies for the black vastness of space. Through the windows, he saw planets, glowing stars, and stations floating like silver cities in the void. When they arrived at the council hall, Daniel's heart raced. The building stretched high like a mountain, filled with voices and lights. Leaders of countless races gathered, their faces strange yet curious. Some had eyes like fire, others had skin like stone, and a few shimmered with colors like water. Arya and Leora walked proudly at his side. When they entered the chamber, silence fell. All eyes turned to Daniel. "This is the human?" One voice called, sharp with disbelief. Arya lifted her chin. "Yes, this is Daniel. He is our bondmate." The hall filled with murmurs. Some laughed, others shouted. One elder creature with silver horns stood. "Impossible. A human farmer cannot stand as equal to warriors of the Legion." Daniel felt their eyes burn into him. His hands trembled, but he remembered the sister's words, "Kindness is strength." He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice plain but steady. "I never asked for this. I am no soldier. I fixed machines. I lived a quiet life. But 15 years ago, I found 2 children who were hungry and afraid. I gave them food because it was the right thing. If that small act matters to them, then I accept it. If it matters to you, then perhaps you should think about why." The hall fell quiet. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Yet not everyone was convinced. Some of the council still doubted, and whispers of war filled the air. Enemies of the Star Legion saw weakness in this bond and moved quickly. A fleet attacked the council station, sending alarms blaring through the halls. Arya and Leora rushed to their ship, Daniel following close. "Stay inside," Arya warned. "It is dangerous." But Daniel shook his head. "I can't fight like you, but I won't hide. I will help however I can." The sisters looked at each other and nodded. They trusted him. The battle began in the dark space beyond the windows. Enemy ships fired blazing energy beams. The Star Legion fought back, their warships moving in tight formation. Arya and Leora led from the front, their voices strong as they commanded their forces. Daniel, inside the control room, did what he knew best. He fixed. He saw damaged systems, broken panels, and failing machines. And with his quick hands he kept the ship running. When part of the engine overheated, Daniel crawled inside, using his knowledge of machines to stabilize it. "It's not so different from a tractor," he muttered, sweat running down his face. The crew watched with surprise as this human mechanic saved their mighty ship. The battle raged on.
Ow!
But with Daniel's help, the sister ship held strong. They broke through the enemy line, pushing them back. Finally, the attackers fled into the void, defeated. Cheers filled the ship. Arya and Leora turned to Daniel, their glowing eyes filled with pride. "You see," Arya said, "strength is not only in weapons. It is in loyalty, in trust, and in the courage to stand together." The council could not deny what they had witnessed. Daniel, though not a warrior, had proven himself through bravery and skill. His bond with the sisters was not a weakness, but a strength that had turned the tide of battle. In the final meeting, the council declared humanity worthy of respect. Daniel stood with Arya and Leora as they held his hands before the gathered leaders. The sisters spoke as one. "This is our bondmate. He represents what humanity is capable of. Not power, not conquest, but compassion. That is why we chose him, and why we will stand by him forever." The hall rose in silence, and slowly. Even the doubters bowed their heads when they returned to Earth. Daniel stood once more on his porch looking at the stars. But now he was not the same man who once wandered alone. Arya and Leora stood beside him, no longer frightened children, no longer strangers. They were warriors, leaders, and family. The story of Daniel spread not only across Earth, but through the stars. People whispered of the human who once fed to lost sisters, and how that small kindness returned 15 years later to change the fate of worlds.